I've seen them be way more free to express their emotions. I've seen their performance go through the roof. I've seen how it's impacted their relationships with their family and their teammates. More is always possible, like always possible, if you're willing to go inwards and do, at times, difficult work of self-reflection and really integrate what you find into what you're doing. If you want people in the organisation to deal effectively with their emotions and respond well to them, it has to start with the way that you deal with yours. And what we deny will eventually find its way out somehow.
Awesome. So today we are joined by Calum Clark. So Calum comes from a high performance background. He's worked with one of the most successful rugby teams in the Northern Hemisphere, but he's also been on the other side of it, working as a coach within the psychological space. I'd love Cal just to introduce himself first. Cal, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. And would you mind telling the listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a 14-year career playing rugby and various different clubs. I was retired 3 years ago. Alongside the sort of years of my career, I was studying psychology, did a master's in psychology, and then did another master's in coaching afterwards. And then 3 years ago retired and moved into an off-field role at Saracens, and then was working with some of the individuals and a little bit at the team level as well. And then I left to set up my own business, coaching, consultancy, psychology, that type of thing. And that's what I've been doing, or trying to get up and running since then.
Yeah, definitely. And we were just talking then, weren't we, before we started recording, about how so many of the challenges that you're facing, or that we're both facing now, growing out a business, as anyone that takes on that challenge does, can be compared to some of those that we've experienced previously. Obviously, yourself in high performance sport environment, me in the performance space. That's in essence why we're having this really diverse group of thought leaders on the podcast, because there's lessons to be learned, and that cross-pollination can only help people within the business space learn outside of their realm. So yeah, really excited to have you on today, mate. One of the first things that I'd love to delve into is something that I experienced growing up, in that rugby has so many brilliant values that I think it can teach young boys and girls. But one of them, which we've discussed previously, was potentially this maybe toxic masculinity of having to be a certain type of person. That kind of don't show weakness, alpha male element of rugby that I experienced, and I think is still somewhat there, can sometimes be to the detriment of an individual's mental health. Or, you've been very open about experiencing like several disciplinary issues during your career and kind of being seen as like one of rugby's bad boys. For you, was this like almost a repercussion of the need to be a certain type of individual? Because I think you've spoken more recently about how you feel so much more almost like free, and that you found your calling now on the other side, helping people to navigate that.
Yeah, to go back to what you said right at the start of that, like, it depends what you mean by the word showing weakness and what that sort of looks like. Because what I assume you mean is don't show emotion, or don't show certain types of emotion. And I think that for me is what I challenge about maybe stoicism, or potentially like high performance environments or high performance rugby environments, is like, it's a sign of weakness to show any sort of emotion other than aggression and anger. And that's kind of what the big change for me has been, as someone who, I guess, projected an image of kind of, or just thought I was tough or tried to be tough, but I wasn't. And having to then, over the course of the last sort of 4 or 5 years, my life really wasn't working, and having to delve into really what was going on, tap into what was going on underneath that like facade of myself, and actually get into what was happening underneath all that is where I think the real value has been, and the progress has been made for me in my own life. And I think the client side and the people I work with in rugby and in professional sport, when you start to work on the emotional level, that's where you start to get some progress. So I think If by stoicism and weakness you mean like expression of certain types of emotion, then I do challenge that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
And like toxic masculinity, if it's like all you're allowed to be is angry or certain types of emotional displays, then again, I think that's a problem.
Yeah, and I think you've said this before, so I'm not hopefully paraphrasing you, but it was when referring to talking about mental health, you said it's not rugby's problems, it's a wider societal problem. What did you mean by that?
Well, again, I think when we talk about mental health, I think it's important to focus on emotion, because it's such a powerful, untapped, like it's not often spoken about aspect of being a human. And we typically talk about the mind and the mental health, but we don't necessarily understand the power of the emotional life of a person, and then understand how we can actually address it. And I think a lot of mental health problems are actually emotional health problems. These themes that you see in professional sport that you're trying to work with are broader, and they're maybe an acute sort of expression and manifestation of it. But I think they're much broader in terms of where all this applies, and the bigger purpose of all this goes way beyond sport for sure, yeah.
And I guess if we put ourselves in the shoes of listeners who may be working in the corporate space where traditionally very much male-dominated environments, they might experience some of these challenges too, and that there's this particular maybe archetype that they've seen historically as a leader that does X and Y and doesn't show certain emotions like you've spoken about. What are the risks of that, and what would your advice be?
I think the risk of sort of shutting down your emotional life and not being able to feel it and work with it is it'll come out somewhere else in your life, or it'll come out way further down the line. You can kind of push it off in the short term, but that it doesn't go anywhere. You push it down and you sort of act as though it's not there, but it kind of builds up over time, and it seeps out into other areas of your life, whether it's your relationships, whether it's your family, whether it's your work, your relationships with colleagues, etc. So I think to really own and take responsibility for your own emotional life it's not easy. It's a big challenge, but I think it's really important. And I think, again, it's something that's a big theme of the work that I do, because when you start to take ownership of it, you can start to master it. And when you can master it, it can have a really positive impact on your life rather than a negative one. And I say that as, my career, I think my emotions were my biggest enemy and caused me the most problems. And I'm hoping that now they can be more of an ally, a barrier and a weakness, an obstruction.
So, yeah, what I'm hearing is kind of you're reframing some things maybe in the past that you just labelled as negative or to your detriment, and now utilising that, whether that's vulnerability, I guess, or just maybe being more aware and accepting of the fact that we aren't always going to be feeling 100%. We aren't going to be necessarily feeling sky high like everything's amazing. And within the clients that you've worked with, who I'm guessing are in the business space, how do you work with them on that, and what are the normal behaviours you see leaders doing that maybe stops them being able to be more open to these negative thoughts?
I think the work that I do is kind of just getting them to open it up, getting them to look at it a bit more openly and not see it as negative and something to be hidden, because it's happening anyway. If it's going on under the surface, whether it's admitted or not, we are human and we do have emotions and we do respond in certain ways to certain things. So rather than push it down and keep it hidden, it's kind of an opportunity to put it on the table. And then when you put it on the table and start to understand where it's coming from, and then have a plan and a strategy about how to respond to the emotion and what's going on, that's where progress happens, and that's where the forward motion and the development and the growth happens. Whereas when it's just kept in and pushed inside, I think that's when you can feel stuck and you can end up going round and round in circles. And trying to break people out of that pattern and that narrative is kind of the essence of what I'm trying to do. Break them out from where they're at currently into something more high performing, into something that is more the sort of life and way that they want to be living and is higher performing essentially. So yeah, it's all going on internally anyway, but it's giving them the conversation and the opportunity to lay it out so that you can address it and optimize it and make it more like functional for you in what you're trying to achieve.
How do you approach it? Say you're working with someone who's quite young, who maybe doesn't yet have the confidence. I know when I was a younger leader, I was thrown into a leadership position at the age of 24. That for me was a hard time because I didn't want to face these issues, and that I was feeling negative emotions. I was really struggling. It was well out of my comfort zone. I had to develop a whole new skill set to be able to lead effectively. I guess part of the problem is actually accepting that you're experiencing these emotions in the first place. What would your advice or process be to help people sit more comfortably with the fact that they're experiencing those, so that then they can act at some point?
Again, I think we touched on it there. The first part is to normalize it. So again, the issue, say like the norms in society are that we don't have them and we shouldn't have them. Whereas like in the conversation or in the session that I would have, it's to normalize it first. And then from there, you can start to be more constructive with it and respond more effectively, rather than just unconsciously being driven by them, and kind of not even having a chance or choice to respond because you're kind of so focused on shutting it down and like, oh God, like it's really shameful to like be anxious about the future, or it's really it's not acceptable to be disappointed that something hasn't gone my way. Or frustrated that I've not achieved what I want to achieve this week or month. To be able to give that some air and some breathing space is really important. And actually a massive sign of strength and a huge facilitator of performance and growth, which is the main thing, or to change the conversation around it. So yeah, I guess that's like at the heart of it.
Definitely creating a low risk environment where you can express those. And I think that's often the challenge, right? Is we don't feel safe to express it in the environments that we probably are going to get the biggest benefit from expressing it. So how would you go about helping leaders with that, or even just people that aren't in leadership positions, going from, your one-on-one setting where obviously that's a safe space, to actually them being able to verbalize certain emotions, expressions, feelings, opinions in an environment that maybe doesn't have that same level of psychological safety?
Yeah. Well, I think the first part is having the opportunity to do it one-on-one or like in a session and then go out with a plan. It means that they don't have to go back into the same environment. And it's not in that environment necessarily where they have to like work through all this emotional stuff. It's like that's what the session and the service is for, is that is done there, and then they go away feeling resourced, feeling ready. They've got a plan. They've got something to put into action, rather than just kind of shut it down and carry it back into the environment and just not have processed and worked through and expressed it at any point. They come back into the environment and then it's just like spraying it everywhere and projecting onto the people and carrying it all around with them unconsciously. So it's not to say that everyone has to go in and be like that, but they have to, I think, take responsibility for it in some way, somehow, at some point. Yeah. Because I think that there are jobs and situations where there's a limited amount of emotional expression that is possible and healthy. Like it's that right amount of sort of tension and balance, and getting that right is really important.
Yeah, because I guess you've got both ends of the scale, haven't you? You've got that almost blind stoicism where you are, and again, it's probably not the right interpretation of stoicism, because I think stoicism involves accepting all these emotions, which is basically what we're chatting about. But if I use a different phrase of ignoring or refusing to accept these variety of emotions, both positive and negative, all the way to the person at work who literally is a roller coaster of emotions, turbulent, unpredictable. We know predictability, especially from a leader, is crucially important for people to feel safe to express their honest opinions and have a safe space. So how would you recommend people find the right balance between the two?
I think it's like our emotionality, I think, is really personal and individual, which is therefore why it's everyone's responsibility to understand and be able to kind of get a handle on their emotional life. We all have different emotional sensitivities, and certain things will make us feel one way really strongly and another person feel a different way very strongly. So that's why I think it's it's possibly the most sort of like personal journey you can go on. So again, that thing about rhythm, it's not to say sometimes being emotionally vulnerable and expressive is the right thing in an environment or a situation, and sometimes actually saying, look, like, we don't really have the space for this right now, let's just get our heads down and we can deal with it down the line. There's a bit of time and space for both, but if you stay in one position for too long, you can run into trouble. And the point you said there about there are certain leaders who refuse to accept emotion or refuse to express it, like, it's still happening in them, and they might not express it in one arena or environment, but it still happens and it's coming out somewhere else, and what we deny will eventually find its way out somehow. So I think it's just that personal responsibility to understand your own emotional life and to get a handle on it and make it constructive for you, because especially if you're in a leadership position, it's going to impact so much about what happens in your environment, in your organization. The way you deal with your own emotions is going to impact the way everyone else deals with all theirs in their organization, just because there's a lot of modeling done in terms of looking up to someone and looking to someone and saying, okay, is it safe to express emotions here, or is it how do we express them, how do we manage them, like, is it okay to be emotionally volatile? Those kind of norms and behaviors, I think, are really set at the top.
I guess that is both a pro and a con, right? You have someone come in who models element of authenticity, not neuroticism, like we've spoken about, but authenticity, understanding when it's going to be important to show that they're struggling or having a hard time, being able to actually ask for help. And we've all experienced the other side where you then don't feel like it's an environment that you can afford to not be on your game. And it's kind of like this toxic productivity, toxic positivity, which I guess could probably lead to more issues, because you're not actually accepting that there are, problems maybe, or people aren't taking accountability and ownership for mistakes, etc. So it could really spiral.
Yeah, and I think the simplest thing or message to anyone in a leadership position is you've got to be the message that you want the people in your organization to follow. Like, you've got to carry it and be it yourself. So if you want people in the organization to deal effectively with their emotions and respond well to them, it has to start with the way that you deal with yours. If you want them to be solution focused and focus on the task at hand, then it's a responsibility on you to do it yourself. That, I think, is the essence of leadership, is being able to manage and master yourself, which is challenging. And there's all sorts of pressures and challenges that come with that. And I think that's why it's even more important, and that people have the right support and the right kind of do the right work on themselves over time so that they can continue to be effective. I think one of the things that is quite rewarding, very rewarding about the work that I do is is like by starting with players working on themselves, for example, and focusing on what they're doing, they emerge and just become leaders by the fact that they're more effectively managing and leading themselves, taking ownership of their performance, of the way that they are, the way they show up, the words they say, the actions they take. Then that is leadership, and that emerges into just like they become a leader through the way they are, rather than trying to be anything they're not, or sort of trying to sort of fit themselves into a model or a mold of what they think a leader looks like, or the norms of a leader. It's kind of comes from within.
And going back to my previous career working in elite military, a lot of the guys that came through into special forces came from Marines, and going down there, spending time with them, seeing how they train recruits in the first few weeks and months. The first stage is self-leadership. It's making a bed. It's learning all of these different simple behaviors that I think people often overlook, yet don't realize doing those consistently creates an element of being a leader through self-leadership just by osmosis, right? Because when you're emotionally, let's say, healthy or balanced, that doesn't mean you don't feel negative. It means you can be what you need to be for others too. And they then see that, and people look to you. And there's nothing, I think, that puts people off more is a boss or a leader who emotionally is really hard to predict, all over the place. You just can't really work with that. You're constantly almost in threat state. Yeah. And like you say, it's every leader's responsibility. And I spoke about this the other day. It's paradox in that leadership is all about others, but it starts and ends with ourselves.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Like that paradoxical nature of it is the best thing you can do for other people is to focus on yourself. And the best thing you can do for yourself is to focus on the needs of the others, like in a leadership position. So like it's a massive paradox, but I think those paradoxes always have a truth at the heart of them. And yeah, that sort of self-leadership is where it starts, like mastering yourself. And then from there, the kind of, I guess what I believe is that when that starts to happen, the ripple effect just is sort of quite organic, and just people can go, well, you're a leader because like you obviously, lead yourself. You're in charge of your own sort of like destiny, I guess. So, oh, well, that's really authentic and inspiring. Like, I think I'm going to follow this person. I think that's the thing. When you have that sort of real, genuine leadership, it's like a magnet, and people just go, oh, well, obviously, like that's something I want to follow. It's not like an imposed sort of leadership. It's like a natural, well, he's going that way and I'm going to jump on board. So in the very short time I've been working in this area and developing people, that I think is how I see it and view it.
I mean, you've been pretty humble there in saying the short amount of time that you've worked in this area. I mean, that might be the case from a coaching standpoint, but you've seen and been in like several high performance environments from different perspectives. You played for England, captained the under-20s, won the Premiership with Northampton and with Saracens during a very successful period, and then transitioned into leading the psychology side. We use Saracens. They've thrived at the top of Premiership for a long, long time. What are the real cornerstones, the 2 or 3 things that you think leaders and organisations should get right to be able to do that?
I think when I think about like the real high performing people that I've been around, I think the real belief that it's a path that you walk, not a destination that you arrive at. It's like an everyday thing. Even when you're a really good goal kicker, you still have to kick every day to stay in touch with that level of performance. So you might get yourself from up to a really high performing level, but the maintenance at that level is what's important. And I think the repeated high level practice and behaviours are the way you sustain it. And I thought when I was a player that if I got there, I'd stay there. And I had that experience where in the first part of my career, it was just about climbing the ladder. And I was just after the next thing, after the next thing, after the next thing. And that sustained me for a while, and it sustained a level of performance and a hunger and a desire and an ability to show up every day. But I think the biggest lesson was when I played with Northampton, we were chasing like a trophy in a championship, and we won it and we fell off a cliff. And me personally, I was playing for England, and I got one cap and I got injured after that. But then my performance started to massively decline, because I thought that when I or we would get there, it would just last forever, and it would be this, we've arrived now, and like we're just going to win it every year, and I'm going to get to that level and stay there. And I think what the real individuals and teams that sustain it for a long period of time, they understand it's just never ending. Like it's an everyday, moment to moment, session to session practice, not a tick in the box or like a destination you arrive at. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson, having a good moment and a good season and a good week, and then being properly high performing and elite.
Yeah, it's really funny hearing you talk about it like that, because I've heard quite a few people who work in a similar space, or just even leaders in companies, say we're trying to build a culture, as if like culture is this end destination, when in actual fact what you're talking about there is it's the behaviors day in, day out. Yeah. And that's underpinned by the values, underpinned by the identity of who you are as an organization. And then that's something that I'd love to tap into as well. Like you've said there, when you won it with Northampton, you guys obviously achieved amazing success, but then it fell off. Difference is that Saracens were obviously able to repeat that and have been able to repeat that year after year. Where does identity come into that? How much do you think that allows that repeatability to occur?
Yeah, I think you've got to understand your strengths, and you've got to understand what you're about and understand what makes you effective. And I think that's a really important start point. Alongside areas of growth and improvement, like you've got to understand like what you fall back on in times of stress. To be resilient, you've got to know who you are, to know what you're bouncing back to know how to get yourself back on track, and being able to focus on process and the task at hand is so important in managing the sort of emotional highs and lows of it all. I think that you've got to have like scaffolding and foundations to your performance and who you are, and you've got to fortify and build and evolve those over time so that you can continue to grow. Whereas it felt a little bit like in my own career, I'll speak for myself, I just focused on like the achievements, and I had nothing underneath it. So when there was wobbles in the road or like things didn't quite go my way, it was like existentially shattering, and it, I didn't have the high performance habits and lifestyle necessarily underneath it, and the talent really, longer term. But like when I look at my life and how I was living and what was going on in my life, like it was never going to be sustainable to stay at that level. And I was probably lucky to get there in the first place. So I think working with clients now, it's about building those strong foundations and the right habits, the right behaviours that just become habitual and normal, and help them grow and develop and make it sustainable, so that when they get there, they stay there. And not only do they stay there, they excel there, is what I'm really trying to guide them towards. It's like, say, if you're having some real solid foundations, and it's great to have a goal to aim for, but you don't want to get there and fall off. So it's making sure that it's sustainable. And then when you get there, there's actually something more to go to. And then you get there and there's something more. And it's just that never-ending process, so that they never sort of go backwards or fall below that kind of level.
What I'm hearing there is that word you said towards the end, process focus, isn't it? It's that excellence ultimately is underpinned by system, process, the habits, as opposed to an achievement. Because anybody, if they sacrifice every other area of their life, can probably get to a pretty high level. But what is it that allows you to sustain that at the top? And also to be able to have other facets to your identity in your life. And like you've spoken there about these foundations. I remember when I was young, like I moved to the other side of the world for work. I was in professional rugby over in New Zealand and absolutely loved it. and almost think I placed so much of my identity in my work because I had sacrificed relationships, friends and family who I still stayed in touch with, but saw for 2 weeks of the year when I was back at Christmas. How do you approach that, in that you want people to be able to obviously achieve what they want to achieve at a high level and sustain that, but I guess there's the risk of losing other aspects of the identity that we all know impacts resilience, right? Like social support, the network that you have around you. If that goes, that can potentially derail all these efforts. How do you approach ensuring people retain other facets of their identity?
Yeah, I think that's a massively important point you make. And I think, again, from my own experience, I didn't nurture enough of my identity outside of being a professional rugby player, and I ran into a lot of trouble and a lot of problems. So firstly, if I'm working with someone, it's always conveying them a sense to them that they're much more than just their performance. Like, we can dive into it and focus on it, but always the way you approach them and you how you are with them, like there's always more to you than this. And encouraging them to explore it and think a little bit more about it. Some clients are just like, I just want to focus on this for now. And it's like, okay, like that's great. And that's important for kind of the age and the sphere of life you're in. But there'll come a point where you want to broaden out from that and make sure you've got other aspects of your life. So like that relational part that you've spoken about is really important for long-term sustainability. You'll have really solid relationships, both in and out of work, that are really positive and give you, like, they really sustain and support you. That's central. That's massive. So yeah, again, like checking in with people, like, where's this person at in terms of relationships? Like, do they have good quality people around them? What's their family background like? Because then that impacts how you approach them and how you work with them. And obviously, like, the relationship I'm trying to provide professionally is one that is positive and gives them a lot and is consistent and is of the right nature. But then, yeah, like the goal is to get them on their own 2 feet to a point where, like, they've got everything they need from the other relationships in their life. And then the other part, encouraging them to focus on, well, if I didn't do that job and I didn't have those relationships, like, what about me? What am I interested in? What, beyond all of that, like, what gives me some interest and joy and like motivates me. So yeah, there's a couple of aspects there, but it's, I suppose, like that holistic development. So it's not just down one channel is important for the long-term sustainability of it all as well.
Yeah, and when I was doing my research for this, it was interesting because I saw a quote that you'd put, which obviously links back to this about you playing rugby. You said made you miserable, and that the work that you've done with the dean of the psychology department that you spoke really highly of, like, has changed your life. And it's funny, isn't it? Because we're sat here and we're obviously talking about how you can achieve high performance in a very specific area of your life. But how, I guess, can you figure out whether that's actually the pursuit of what is most important to you, or something maybe that you're living out, which I totally experienced too. I went to a school where, because I was a good rugby player and rugby was like the top sport, it kind of shapes your identity for you. And I think it's only since I went and worked in it and loved that, but it's only, I guess, over the last sort of 5 years or so as I've got older that I've seen, wow, like that actually did shape my identity, probably both for positive, without a doubt, gave me confidence, resilient, understand teamwork, etc. But I almost felt like I had to do some work to evolve out of that. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I'd go back to that original quote and say that I made myself miserable by playing rugby because it was my choice ultimately at the end of the day. And I might not have been aware of that at the time, like coming through it, because you're just kind of going along, not really questioning it. But it's not rugby's fault. Rugby's rugby. And I chose to be involved and play a part in it for that length of time. And I think probably when I said that, I think it was a little bit like earlier after I'd retired, I was probably a little bit kind of bitter and spat out. But actually, it's not rugby's fault. And it's not the people in rugby's fault. They're just in there doing their thing. What it what I think I really meant was, I don't think that was conducive to me being sort of happy and feeling fulfilled and feeling like I was operating at my full potential, me being in that environment. And I think me coming out of that environment has challenged me to actually start to go like, well, really, what are you really made of? Like, you can't sort of stay in that environment that wasn't necessarily had you operating at all cylinders. Let's go on, like, get out into the world and see what you can really, really do. So yeah, that would be the change I would make to that original quote. And like, the part of me that would love rugby to progress a little bit more and love the sort of like the culture and the way things work to move forward in some ways. Like, I can't stay in it and whinge about it. I think I was sort of getting to that point. And even that quote tells me I was at that point but like, I had to move on and find out what was right for me. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah. What would you love to see? Like, obviously you felt, which I totally get and I agree with, like, we all make a decision. But when we're also young and we're very malleable, I think there's a responsibility too to develop or to communicate that whilst you may be a great athlete or whatever, like, that isn't you. That's one part of you. What would you like to see? And this might apply just as much, obviously we're talking about rugby, to listeners and their environments and industries that they're in too. What was the change that you would want to see?
I think like a proper integration of the deeper understanding of like the human condition, so psychology. Like, I would love that to be integrated more fully. So the understanding of what we're really dealing with when we're asking these human beings to go out there and try and achieve something difficult, to push themselves, what's optimal for these people to go and excel, and like, what does it really, really, really look like, and what's really possible, and like, to really explore and push that conversation forward. Because there's norms and things and just normal ways of working in professional sport that just sort of like go unchallenged, and that's just the way things are. And I suppose it's the case in any organisation or any culture, but to really challenge it and integrate like a more optimal way of working would be great, because I think that would be healthier for development and healthier for people. But I also think it would take performance like through the roof as well. And so, yeah, that's what I'd love to see.
What do you mean there?
Healthier is in the way they feel and the way they think in whatever they're doing, in the environment they're in. How do they deal with their emotions? Just like a healthier environment and culture to be in that brings the best out of them, that makes them feel like challenged but supported at the right times, feel like they're contributing, feel like they're a part of something. All these things are possible, and all these things are more optimal for human health and functioning. And yeah, it's just how far people are willing to explore that and what changes they're willing to make and how it's willing to grow and evolve. And I certainly don't have all the answers, but there's a lot of growth and development that can happen in these environments. And like on a micro level, that's the change that I would love to see there is what the change I'm trying to generate and develop with the clients I work with. Because I've seen them become healthier as people. I've seen them be way more free to express their emotions. I've seen their performance go through the roof. I've seen how it's impacted their relationships with their family and their teammates and their coaches by that investment in their psychological development. So I've seen it and I'm working with it on a micro scale. So it's then just that broadening out then of trying to do it at the organisation and the team and the cultural level.
You were saying, like, which was very honest with you, like you were a bit bitter, like frustrated, just in that you saw the opportunity to take more of a whole person approach maybe, but didn't feel maybe culturally or environmentally they were ready for that yet. Yeah. There's going to be loads of people that are sat here listening thinking, yeah, I would love for our environment to be more like X. What would your advice be for that? Maybe having seen what the barriers were in your organisation or team?
The start point, I think there's got to be a curiosity and a willingness and a readiness to really be reflective and look inwards, I think, is the start point. And I always say, like, the readiness of the client is so important in any of this type of work. If someone is happy with how things are functioning and they're content there and they're getting the results, etc., then why change it? And I have some respect for that. And I think it's hard to sort of challenge that. But then whenever the moment comes or the readiness comes to really look in, and it's usually when something bad happens or there's some suffering, then that's when to really open the door and start to explore where the growth and the development can happen. So yeah, it's kind of being willing and truly ready. And I don't know if there's like necessarily a recipe for that. Just that feeling like there's more, I want more here, and more is always possible, like always possible if you're willing to go inwards and do at times difficult work of self-reflection and really integrate what you find into what you're doing to move forward.
It reminded me when you said that of a quote that previous guest, I don't know if you know Duncan French, but he said, the research shows we make decisions 4 times more often to avoid failure than to seek success. And like you say, as humans, we're just evolutionarily programmed to be comfortable. And it takes someone, some group, some team special to actually go from good to great, or even from great in your area to great in 20 years' time. You know, you look at sport, for example, the quality of football 30 years ago compared to now, there's been a huge transformation in that. It was funny, there was another guest, Andy Walsh, who he worked for Red Bull and he headed up their high performance department. And basically he said, well, we've got all these athletes who are at the top of their game in each of their area. How can we make them better? Like, they're already the best. And what they did was they reframed what excellence looks like, which I thought was brilliant. And they broke down each area that contributes towards success in that realm. So for rugby, it could be teamwork, it could be skills, it could be tactical, it could be physical, etc. And they compared that individual to what excellence looks like across any discipline or area. So, you know, do you have the multitasking ability of an air traffic controller? Do you have the patience of Dalai Lama, or, I don't know, single mum with 4 kids? Like, it was interesting how they reframed that. But what you're saying there really makes sense in that regard, and that people need to be the ones themselves, I guess, wanting to drive things forwards. Like, it's very challenging to come in. That's what myself and 2 others did when we founded this culture change human performance program within UK Special Forces. From an organisational standpoint, we had to win over the hearts and minds, both at the bottom and at the top. And so, yeah, I guess what you're saying there is, like, look inwards first, understand what it is about you that makes yourself want to go to another level, and then understand maybe where others are at.
Yeah, I think the thing you said right at the beginning about, like, there is a part of us that wants comfort, security, and to stay where we are. And then there's a part of us that also seeks growth and development. And there's a time, again, to be in each one. Like, if you just chase that all the time and you never acclimatize and recover and rest, then, like, you can burn out and it can get too much. So, but if you stay there too long, you can get bored and sort of, like, never really reach your potential. So I think there are environments that honor and like reach the sort of more growth and development orientated part. And then oftentimes, to go back to something we spoke about earlier, like real high performance, you do always reach and touch on that part, but there's massively a lean into that people can still grow no matter what. And that's just, you sustain it, because the minute you sort of like get to the top and you move into that like comfort area and you're like, oh, right, I don't really need to do all the things I used to do and with the same level of hunger and desire, then that's when you fall off. And that, with the clients I'm working with now, it's always that thing about where are you going to grow next, and what area of your game are you looking at improving? Are you happy with everything, or where are you going to nudge it forward? And always having that approach and that question is the thing that continues the success and the performance over time.
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel like that is what happened at Saints with Northampton? Was there an element of we've got there, like you say?
Yeah, and I can speak for my own experience being a part of that. It just felt like that was the thing. I don't know if we were looking to build the foundations to be successful for a longer period of time. It was like just win the trophy, and we did. And then it just felt like we never got back to that hunger because we'd achieved the thing we wanted to achieve. And it's no one's fault. I noticed him. Things just didn't have the same hunger, maybe, and it unravelled off the back of that. I think we had a good year the following year after we won the league, but we got knocked out in the semi-finals, and then after that, we just kind of the performance started to kind of drop off a little bit. So yeah, it is harder to sustain and maintain for a longer period of time.
If you don't have greater purpose, is what you're saying, than that goal itself.
If the goal is to win one premiership, which I think was what we were focused on, or is your goal to build an organisation and a team that achieves long-term sustainable performance? And again, when I look at myself, was my goal to get a cap for England, or was it to perform at the highest possible level that I could for the longest period of time? And I think I was chasing external things rather than anything that actually had longevity. That was definitely true of me in my own career. And
what are the warning signs if you're not aligning with what actually gives you purpose or meaning?
Good question. I suppose I was pursuing the whole rugby thing, and I always felt very lost, very confused, very empty, not really fulfilled. And moving into what I do now feels a lot more purposeful. And it's just like a feeling when you have a good session with someone, or you see when you're working with go out and perform. It's like an internal reward. Of course, it's a service and it's a professional job, but that feels incidental compared to the internal reward that you get. Whereas I think when I was playing sport, all I had was the external. And I was going through all this pain, and I was on this track that I deep down didn't really want to be on, didn't really feel right for me. I was like, oh, well, it'll all be worth it if we win a premiership, or it'll all be worth it if I, play well this weekend. And by the end of my career, I was literally living for the night after we'd played. The rest of my time, I was in so much physical pain, just scrapping away to get through to the weekend, to then hopefully have at least 10 hours after a game where I didn't have to worry about the next week. But to be living your life for less than 3 or 4 hours after a game before you have to start worrying about the next one. There's always going to be hard work. You're always going to have to sacrifice. But it's a different feeling inside when it's for something that is what you want to be doing versus what you think you should be doing, or what you think someone else wants you to do, or what society thinks is great. Being a professional sportsman in society is this massively sort of heralded and respected thing. But for me personally, that didn't feel great inside. So I was sort of trapped between two stories of what's really right for me versus what I think everyone else thinks is great. And ultimately, I feel like I'm much happier and much rather be where I am now, even though, there's a long way to go and always challenges and that side of things. It feels more right inside.
Do you think you need to go through it and feel that emptiness to know that it wasn't the right pursuit for you? Or can you proactively catch yourself seeking external validation as opposed to intrinsically meaningful pursuits?
Yeah, I think there's always opportunity to ask the questions of yourself. Is this really what I want to do? Is this really fulfilling me? And then if you ask the questions, then you have the opportunity to move and to make it, to make the adjustment. Whereas, I was just subconsciously, it's only on reflection now, as you said, that I can look back and go, I was chasing something wasn't really right for me. But the only way I knew that was this experience of I feel lost, I feel confused, I don't really know what's going on. my life feels wrong to me. And then I got myself sort of back on track. But I definitely think you can be proactive about it and ask yourself the right questions and make the right course corrections.
Yeah, and it's funny, when we worked with Special Forces group, we always used the phrase, you don't have to be broken to get better.
Yeah.
And in society, certainly, if we're talking about speaking to a psychologist, my fiance is a clinical psychologist. I've spoken to counselors, psychologists in the past. Like, it's been hugely valuable, but it took me getting to a point where my career, that period, wasn't what I needed from it. And then also the personal stuff on the side, it was a difficult period of my life. And like, it required all of that for me to actually then take that step back. Is that because as society, we kind of look at self-reflection as something you do when something wrong has happened, as opposed to just like regularly checking in and doing like a values audit in your head of like, cool, well, I'm spending 50% of my week doing this. These things is what I enjoy and what gives me purpose.
I think there has to be a certain amount of suffering to then know that this isn't right for you. But what I'm conscious of is that it's like, how deep does that suffering have to be before you kind of respond to it and go in a different direction? And I think that's ultimately like what drives me, is I'm trying to provide a service that if I'd have had earlier in my career, the suffering might not have been so deep. And if I'd have learned more about certain things and had certain bits of guidance earlier, then it might not have been so like catastrophic as it got. So I think suffering's inevitable, but authentic suffering is what you're looking for, like authentic challenge, authentic difficulty that feels right, that feels like I'm taking on this challenge because it's part of the journey that I need to go on. Whereas like that other type, it's like, how much of that do you need before you can start to make some adjustments? So with your story there's an element of that just comes with life. But I just always am conscious of trying to be there for people when, or provide that service for people to try and like address it quicker.
Definitely. I'm sure you would have spoken to quite a few, whether it's clients or just leads, people that are interested who work in corporate space. Is there a trend in regards to challenges and areas that these individuals are facing that they're coming to you for?
So I think something that seems to be a need in the people I've spoken to, in the clients I've worked with in both sport and business, is this kind of developmental process to go from kind of talented, young, ambitious, hard-working individual to then like kind of this mature kind of person who can then become a leader. So it's that high potential into kind of like performance outcome. So in a sporting context, it's that kind of like academy kid who's survived, but then needs to be able to like get themselves to a level where they can be trusted to play in the Premiership and then trusted to excel in the Premiership, and that wherever their talent takes them, that journey. So are they good enough to be an international, and then making sure that if they are, then they're making the right steps towards that. In the corporate world, I think it's similar, where you get people who come in as really good and performers, and then they eventually have to step up then into management and into leadership and into this whole new skill set of being able to deal with people's emotions, like work with people on that level. And it's all these different phases of growth and development, and that you've got the resources, the right support and guidance for every step of the way. So that they're the sort of patterns I would see, that almost like that boy to man journey in both professional sport and in the corporate world. Because typically, like the people at the top of either sport or the corporate world, they're busy people and they're focused on their own performance, and there's only a limited amount of capacity that they've got to work with, to give down to people. So therefore, something like what I do is hopefully to help them grow and develop alongside and within already like sort of pre-existing structures.
Yeah. And a lot of what I do now is working with youngish leaders to help them to excel in these high pressure environments, because like yourself, it's been through my learnings and my mistakes. And like, I always use a quote of 82% of people who are leaders are accidental leaders, and that they entered a quote unquote leadership role without any prior training. And yeah, like you say, I think there's a certain element of discomfort that's always needed for growth. But when does that become unnecessary suffering? And because of my experiences, having to rapidly upskill myself and really deeply reflect on what it was that I was lacking, or how was I seeing it in the wrong way, has then equipped me with the skills to be able to hopefully help others not experience that and to then excel. I've gone on to do really great things and work in really successful teams, but it's that transition, isn't it? It's that liminal phase where, one, the greatest growth comes, but two, sometimes unnecessary suffering. And the fact that I'm sure a lot of companies do their best, but as you say, the time and effort that's often needed to help people develop can't be through a once a month leadership day, or even, to be honest, even like an hour a fortnight still often is, unless that person's going away and doing a lot of work themselves, probably not enough to support people through what is a difficult step.
Yeah, and I think the personal growth process is challenging, it's difficult, and it needs the right sort of guidance and support rather than a quick fix thing. And I think when I was running into problems when I was younger, and I started to think I need to sort something out here, and went down the very quick fix, 7 steps to whatever, and that's kind of where it all started, that curiosity, and then eventually arriving at the point now where it's like, oh my God, like it's every day this journey, like it's something that doesn't really end, and that you need support on that, and you need the right kind of guidance, and you need people in your life and your own awareness and self-reflective ability to see it through. So I think that's the humbling realization for me, and then also, like you say, why I'm committed to doing the work. And what really excites me is being on the longer term journey with people, and you build a relationship now that hopefully with a young player that they'll want to work with you for the rest of their career, because every session you have is not just, I've got this thing I'm going to teach you. It's, I know all of this about you. I know all of these things about you, and we've shared these things together. And then the sessions are so much richer because it's like in 20 minutes, you can just say the right thing in the right tone at the right time. So that's why it's being patient, you've got to build these relationships, you've got to be trusted, and you've got to work with them and live some life with them so that you can have an impact.
Definitely. And it's awesome, isn't it? When you are doing something that closely aligns with what gives you meaning, like you said, this is the most fulfilling work you've ever done now. So yeah, it's brilliant to hear, mate. Maybe if we finish on one little tidbit, you've obviously said there it involves more than just an inspirational quote or you apply this one step. But for listeners and those watching today, what is one thing you'd suggest anyone can do themselves? And I use this with italics, that can drastically change how they feel and perform in whatever they're pursuing.
Yeah, I think, and this isn't my original material, but there's a writer called James Hollis who I think is great, and he often gets asked this question, and he often says, start with your patterns. So the patterns that you see repeating themselves in your life, there's something going on there that needs addressing. So if, for example, you keep experiencing, periods of kind of boredom and stagnation in your job or in your work, and you can push it off for a week, but then it comes back round the next time, or even in relationships, it's like, it's okay for a while, and then we have these problems and these flare-ups, and that's when you start to get a deeper understanding of like the subconscious patterns and stories that you're living out. So start with the patterns that repeat in your life, and then it's about, there's a story going on there that you need to challenge and change and write a new one and start to, write a more productive narrative. Because I think as humans, we are quite habitual, and we like to go sort of round and round in well-rehearsed narratives. And what's challenging is to break those and form new ones that are more optimal for you and the way that you want to live. So yeah, that's what I would say. Like, start by looking at what patterns are repeating in your life, and that'll tell you a lot about what's really going on.
Yeah, definitely. So, like you said earlier, look inwards.
Yeah,
And then,
yeah. It really is an inside job, and it's not easy, and it challenges me every day to think, should I be doing this? And oh God, what does this person think? Or what does society think of where I'm at in life? But it's just kind of having the courage to stay true to what feels right inside, and keep going with it. Yeah.
And it's funny because, though I'm not pointing the finger, it's all of our own responsibility, especially as adults. You're never taught how to look inwards. I was never taught how to self-reflect. People just said self-reflect, and I think that in and of itself is a skill too. So I'm sure the work you do helps people to develop that skill of being able to look inwardly without judging, ultimately trying to remove as much bias as possible, even though it's never possible. That's why you're there having the conversation with them. But no, that's brilliant. Where can people find you, mate, if those listening are interested to know more?
Yeah, Innate High Performance is my company. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, obviously, as myself. And then I've got a website, innate.works. And I'm available to chat anytime and explore whether there's anyone out there who's interested in applying these sort of things and in whatever walk of life. So, they're the channels.
Awesome. Okay. What I'd love to do, if you're happy, we do it with every guest, so I'm not picking on you, is just to finish with a 10-word association, if you're happy with that.
Okay. Yeah, fine.
Yeah? Cool. All right. So the first word is emotion.
Healthy.
Success.
Potential.
Rugby.
That's a tough one. Grateful.
Fun.
Music.
Purpose.
Innate.
Coaching.
I'd say art. It's an art.
Saracens.
Grateful.
Family.
That's actually a really hard one. I'd say home.
Young.
Lost.
Fair one. Future.
Hopeful.
And legacy.
I'd say innate. Yeah. What happens? What I do through that will be whatever legacy I leave. Yeah.
Awesome, mate. Nice one. It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, really hard, man. Yeah. That really stumped me, man. I thought I'd be way quicker.
Honestly, I normally edit it out. It's absolutely fine. I think it's important that people think hard, because we use so many words to describe things. It's really hard just to use one, right? To actually eliminate a lot of it and try and capture the essence of what the message is.
Yeah, and it's tough because for so many of those things, I've got conflicting feelings. Like rugby, on one hand, I'm grateful, but there's still an element of so painful. So then the immediate thing is still a bit of healing to do. But then I'm also so grateful because it's given me what I do now. And there's so many of those that were like that from Saracens as well. There's a lot of frustration there, but I'm so grateful for all of the totality of it. So yeah, I was really split there.
Well, to be honest, mate, from everything you've said today, it sounds like you're on a great path, and one in which you can help lots of others to find their journey. So yeah, really appreciate your time, man. Awesome to hear what you're doing.
Thanks, man.
And thank you very much.
No worries.
All right. So I hope you enjoyed the episode with Calum. There were some key takeaways that I'd love to reflect on now. The first being the need to acknowledge and accept our emotions for high performance. In Calum's words, acknowledging and accepting emotions without labelling them as positive or negative is crucial for choosing how to respond and subsequent high performance. If we don't address our own emotions, they will eventually find their way out somehow. In environments with low psychological safety, it's wise to step out of them to express, accept, and process these emotions, whether that's one-on-one with a psychologist or through other means. A lot of people make the mistake of trying to process and solve the problems that they face in environments where it's extremely challenging to do so, such as at work. Have a think about what the best environment might be for you to safely acknowledge, process, and respond to challenging emotions. Ultimately, Calum believes that there's an opportunity, though, to improve many workplace cultures to ones that breed emotionally healthy people, and the impact he's seen this have on performance is huge. The second thing is how to respond rather than react. Finding the right level of emotionality is crucial to being a reliable leader, a productive team member, and a high performer. Leaders should communicate when it's the right time and place to express emotions and vulnerability, and times when it's better to provide people with the opportunity to feel heard at a later date. Now, to be able to actually express our emotions in a productive sense, we need to have emotional control first to do the latter effectively. Otherwise, you become highly neurotic and unpredictable. In regards to being able to respond rather than react, it's really important to have a plan and strategy for how to respond to an emotion. Otherwise, you're leading it up to chance and willpower. And we've all experienced how that ends up. The next thing is that high performance is a journey, not a destination. From Calum's perspective, it's what you do every day, and that was his biggest lesson as a player. It was the difference between Saracens, a team who saw success as sustaining, winning culture over a whole generation, versus Northampton, where as they won the Premiership and achieved their goal, performance then declined. Sustainable high performance nearly always requires a higher purpose than winning trophies, as Calum says. Otherwise, you'll see people ease off and lose that hunger when you achieve success, or on the flip side, if you don't. It's crucial to nurture other facets of your identity when you are pursuing high performance goals, making sure that you remain resilient and sustain a high level of performance by not placing your whole identity in your job. Ultimately, you're way more than your job or your performance at work. Ask yourself, if you took away your job, who are you? And that's a really important question to reflect on. Talking about reflection, Calum spoke about the importance of both self-reflection and hardship. And self-reflection often comes when something bad happens or there is some suffering. Calum believes that some level of suffering is inevitable and not necessarily bad, as anything worth having is hard, but it's crucial to choose your hard or to choose your suffering, and to make sure it's aligned with what actually matters to you as opposed to society's expectations or your peers. The starting point for understanding this is the readiness to be reflective and the curiosity of what better could look like. Calum referenced someone called James Hollis, who has said before to start by looking at your patterns in order to get a deeper understanding of the stories you're telling yourself, what you need to challenge, and what you need to write a more productive narrative. Ultimately, the key to a fulfilling life is knowing who you are, what's intrinsically meaningful to you, and pursuing it. And this will start through self-reflection. So these are my takeaways, but I'm sure you had some for yourself. Most importantly, I really hope you enjoyed the episode. It was ultimately created for you. If you do enjoy the episode, please like, share, subscribe, and make sure to watch the next episode when it drops. Thanks again, and speak soon.